Good evening, gentlemen. Tonight we're going to be looking at European nationalism and more specifically the unification of Germany and Italy during this age of European nationalism. Below are two pictures. The one on the left is the German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, and the man on the right is Count Camillo Cavour of Sardinia Piedmont. Both these men have a very significant role in unifying their respective countries, and we're going to look at the steps that they took to allow for that unification process. A couple questions to start off with. One, what methods did Bismarck and Cavour use to unify Germany and Italy and the Italian provinces, respectively? And what was the purpose of unification, especially at this time in history? While we're going through this, try and keep these in the back of your head, or jot these down so that we can answer these as we move. So the early steps for unification, it all draws back to Napoleon. Okay, remember when we talked about how Napoleon was just ripping through, taking over Europe. He dominates Western Europe and puts his own people in power and restructures the provinces of Europe and kingdoms of Europe so that it allows him to have power. Well, then he falls, and then you have the Congress of Vienna coming up, and when they come in, they try and send everything back to the way it was prior to, even all the way back before the French Revolution. So they're making massive changes around, and what they then do is they want to surround France with a much larger and more powerful country. So they actually redraw borders and lump all the German provinces together and put Prussia in charge, because Prussia is the largest of the German provinces. So the Congress of Vienna, and if you just take a step back even further, Napoleon could actually be given the credit for the beginning of the process of German unification. So Prussia does take the lead. In 1834, they established the Zollverein, which was a economic union where they removed all trade barriers. There were no taxes to trade between German provinces, and this is huge because once you have an economic union, it allows for a political union to become a little bit more easier. And this also then allows Germany to become a major industrial power. It's not until later in the 1860s, 70s, and 1880s where Germany becomes one of the leaders in steel production in the world. And it's all because of this Zollverein. The next step, though, is in 1848 when the German people, that is, appoint or try to appoint Frederick Wilhelm IV of Prussia as their emperor. This is, again, a huge step. They're looking to finally unify under one rule. The problem is he doesn't want it. And the main reason is that he feels that a crown should not be given by the people, it should be given by God. So that old school way of thinking. So he refuses the crown, and this now keeps Germany as separate provinces until the appointment of Otto von Bismarck in 1862. And Bismarck is appointed German Chancellor, and he is an extreme loyalist to Wilhelm I, the King of Prussia. So what he does is he wants to make Prussia the most dominant power in Germany, and then that would then allow Prussia to advance in the unification process of all the provinces. So this map just kind of shows you the different provinces of Germany. They're all highlighted in different colors, and you can see that down below. Now what Bismarck does is he needs to find a way of getting all these together. Now, there's a problem. Some of them are under control of another country. They've been annexed by other groups, or they are just separated, and they didn't feel they wanted to unify. So he has to find a way of bringing all these guys together. So what Bismarck does is he first puts into and practices a form of politics called realpolitik, and he promotes this, and it's politics based on the needs of the state, right? Everything that is done for the good of the state. So even though he's trying to get the people on his side, everything he's doing is to help the unification process. And as I stated, he's an extreme loyalist to the crown. So in reality, realpolitik is also real politics based on the needs of the king. He wants to put Wilhelm as the emperor of Germany. He wants to make him the first emperor of Germany. So Bismarck lays out a plan of how to do that. And the first thing he does is he tries to get the people on board, and he gives a great speech called the Blood and Iron speech. In this speech, to rile up the people and also to gain support, because what he wanted was he needed the German legislative body. He needed them to buy into it and to devote money to it, so that to the cause, and he needed them to help build the military industry. So he said, all right, we need to join forces, and the only way that we are going to unify Germany and the German provinces is through blood and iron, through war and industry. So he gives this great speech. Everybody's all hyped up, but the legislative body denies him, doesn't give him the money. So what he does is he just takes it from him anyway. He just cuts corners to find ways of gaining that money he needed to build up the military. Because Bismarck saw that in order to do this, a large military and one of the most advanced, highly equipped militaries in the world would benefit the unification process. So the first thing he does is, after he builds this massive military and the most advanced military through weapons and the use of steel, he then declares war on Denmark. Now, if you know anything about Denmark, they're not the most militarily advanced society. So it's like, a 10th grader going up and beating up a kindergartner. All right, it's not an impressive, battle. But on top of it, he doesn't just go in alone. He actually teams up with Austria-Hungary, which is an empire. And so now you have two guys teaming up on little itty-bitty Denmark. But he needs Denmark because they hold two German provinces in Schleswig and Holstein. So Bismarck uses this war in a twofold process. One, he's looking to gain those provinces back, those lost provinces from Denmark. And two, he's also using it as a way of almost scouting the Austria-Hungarian forces, because he knows that the next step is he has to go to war with Austria-Hungary. So he uses their resources. So he splits the cost of the war with Austria-Hungary, checks them out, sees how they fight, uses some of their resources, and then he figures out a way of saying that they broke part of the peace treaty when written up after the war with Denmark, and he then declares war on them a year later in 1866. It's called the 7 Weeks War because that's all it took. I mean, he completely annihilates the Austro-Prussian forces. And this now allows for the Treaty of Prague to be established. And under the Treaty of Prague, He was given the province that was taken by Austria-Hungary after the war with Denmark. But it also says that Austria-Hungary would be an ally with Germany, which is huge because now, one, Germany doesn't have to worry about Austria-Hungary trying to get back at them. But two, they are now out of the picture when Germany then has to go to war with France. So Bismarck, this is one thing that makes Bismarck great. He sees almost 5 steps ahead of everybody else, which is kind of like that. They talk about a great athlete, or even a great chess player, right? They can see moves before their opponent. Okay, and that's what Bismarck is doing. He is laying out the plan to really show that he needs to get the provinces unified in a way that will quickly do it and also show German dominance. Now, the war with France was significant, but it was also kind of unique in the way that he went about it. He couldn't declare war on France because if you look at it, war with Denmark in 65, war with Austria in 66. Okay, if he had declared war on France, he would have looked like a warmonger. And the last guy that tried to do that was a little guy named Napoleon. So he didn't want to be, and people still remember Napoleon. So he didn't really want to be seen as that new Napoleon. So what he does is he edits a telegram that was sent between Wilhelm I of Prussia and Napoleon III of France. And basically in that telegram, he challenges France. And Napoleon III, who's the nephew of Napoleon, is one of those guys that he wants to show that he's just as good as his uncle on the battlefield and also just as a strong leader. So he takes it as an offense and declares war on Prussia. Well, this is what Germany needs. They mobilize quickly. They crush France. Now, the Franco-Prussian War says 1870 to 1871, but that's not actually, it didn't actually take a year. They annihilate France. It's also the scene of one of the largest surrenders in French history. Napoleon III leads his army out there, and they're just overwhelmed by the German forces, and pretty much the entire army surrenders at once, and Napoleon III runs away. So the Franco-Prussian War was very significant because it showed Germany going up against what was considered a military power at the time in France, and they just annihilate them. So with that, they get the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine, which will come into play a little bit later when we look at World War I and World War II. But they get their provinces, and with that, Germany is now unified. So after this, Bismarck then decides that he's going to get the people on board. He's just put them through years of war and a lot of resources going to that process. So he feels that by establishing a new constitution, it will allow the people to feel that they've gotten what they wanted. They get something out of it, aside from new provinces. So with that, in that new constitution, he establishes a 2-house legislature, the Bundesrat, which is the upper house. It's controlled by the upper class citizens in German society, and also Bismarck and Emperor Wilhelm, and the Reichstag, which is the lower house, which are the equivalent to the House of Commons in Parliament. So he gives the people that 2-house legislature, he gives them that new constitution, but in reality, because he's realpolitik, the constitution is structured in such a way, and the legislature is structured in such a way that the emperor and the chancellor still have complete control. They have veto power over everything. So it gives the people a feeling that they have something to say, some say in government, but in reality, the emperor and the chancellor still have that complete control. So again, just showing you the unification process, and you can see what they gained after as they moved through. So by 1871, they are a complete unified country. And it's then in 1871 that the Emperor Wilhelm I is named the first Kaiser, and it's the establishment of the Second Reich. Now, after they unify, Bismarck needs to get everybody on board with Wilhelm. So he then promotes a movement called Coulter Kampf. This is a set of reforms, and these reforms were established to limit the power of the church and socialists, who were gaining a lot of control in the German political scene. So he wanted to limit their power because he felt that they were taking away the power from Kaiser Wilhelm. This completely backfires. One, you don't go against the church, so a lot of the Catholics resisted greatly, and then with the socialists, you had workers that were upset that that Bismarck was trying to take power away from them, so they then resist. So Bismarck actually has to step back and say, you know what, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. So this was actually the first little setback that Bismarck had, but it showed that the people still maintained their identity. They weren't just going to all blindly follow the king, even though they would if the king was doing what he needed. But Bismarck, trying to do too much, gets a lot of resistance. But on the flip side, Germany is booming. The House of Krupp is the major steel producer in Germany. They're kicking out steel, and they end up becoming number one in the world in steel production, which flip-flops between the House of Krupp and Carnegie Steel in the United States over the last decades of the 1800s and into the 1900s. And then German science is moving forward with the establishment of synthetics. And then, of course, the government support of the economy. Germany is just taking off. In 1888, Kaiser Wilhelm I steps down and appoints his son, Wilhelm II, Kaiser. And when Wilhelm II takes over, he makes a very controversial move, and he asks Bismarck to step down. He feels that Bismarck has way too much power, and he is not willing to share that power with Bismarck, which is huge because Bismarck is the father of the German country. So this was not a popular move by Wilhelm II. But to combat that, Wilhelm then puts in place two reforms. One, he establishes social welfare so that it benefits the lower class, so he gets them on board. And then he also promotes the idea of overseas empire, where he and the other leaders of the European countries decide that they're going to divvy up the world and look for expansion. And this is during that age of imperialism. They especially go after Africa. They then look to divvy up portions of Africa that are not already claimed. And we'll look at that a little bit later. But these two reform movements help Wilhelm get a lot of support from the people needed after asking Bismarck to step down. Now the next little thing we're going to look at is Italian unification. Down below is a picture of all of the men that were involved in the Italian unification, especially the man on the far left, Count Camillo Cavour, and the man in the middle, who is Victor Emmanuel of Sardinia Piedmont. Now Italy had a little bit tougher time of unifying. And we'll look at the differences, and especially looking at Count Camillo Cavour's his strategy of unification. To the right is a painting called 5 Days in Milan. This is depicting the revolution that was occurring in 1848 of the Italian workers' movement. That was actually led by members of the Risorgimento, who end up helping the unification process of Italy. So the thing about Italy was that they were separated into separate provinces, just like Germany, but the major problem was people really identified with their province. Okay, they did not call themselves Italian; they called themselves Tuscan. They called themselves, Neapolitan. They called themselves Venetian. They weren't Italian. So when the unification process was put in place, they met a lot of obstacles because of that regional identity. You also had foreign occupation, just like in Germany. You had Austria, who claimed portions of the northern Italian provinces, and then you had France, who had control in Italy too. So that was also a problem, because Austria and France were two very powerful kingdoms at this time. But you also had great leaders within this unification process. Giuseppe Mazzini is one of those men. He is calling for the unification. He uses the Italian history and the strong Italian heritage to get people on board. He says that we are the birthplace of the Roman Empire, who everybody wants to be like. So, why don't we use that, and unite and come under that, regain that status. So one of his more famous quotes: "Ideas grow quickly when watered by the blood of martyrs." I mean, he's saying that people would take notice. Yeah, people could talk all they want, but as soon as people are ready to die for their beliefs, that's when people really step up and take notice. So he is the leader of the Risorgimento, or the revival, bringing back that strong Italian heritage, that Roman identity. And this is the group that begins that movement for Italian unification. Another member of the Risorgimento is Victor Emmanuel II. He is later appointed King of Sardinia-Piedmont, and it's Sardinia-Piedmont, a very small kingdom, that begins that, or takes the lead in that unification process. And Victor Emmanuel appoints one of his good friends and also a member of the Risorgimento, Count Camillo Cavour, prime minister. And what Cavour then does is he sees that he needs to gain allies, okay, because it's kind of tough. Bismarck was an iron-fisted ruler. Cavour can't be that iron-fisted. He has to find a way of kind of selling Italian unification. So first thing he needs is a strong ally. So he joins with Britain, France versus Russia in the Crimean War, and he's hoping that by just sending a couple troops and sending supplies, he'll gain the attention of a powerful leader from Britain or France. And again, it's kind of like one of those things, which one of these things does not belong? You have Britain, you have France, and you have Sardinia-Piedmont versus Russia. But with that, he does gain support of France. He gets the attention of Napoleon III. And with that alliance, Napoleon III gives him pretty much a blank check and says, hey, you need any help? You let me know. So with that, Cavour picks a fight with Austria. And Austria declares war on Sardinia-Piedmont. Napoleon III comes down and help out. They destroy Austria. And with that, they gain the province of Lombardy, which is then Milan. And this now is that first step in unification. Then he influences revolutions, behind the scenes. He tells all these little provinces in the north to revolt, and which they do. And with that, in 1860, he gained Savoy, Nice, Tuscany, and Emilia. The next step is gaining the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which is going to be a little bit more difficult. So what he does is he sends one of his old buddies, Giuseppe Garibaldi, down to take over the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. And Giuseppe Garibaldi has his own army called the Red Shirts, and they wore red shirts to basically camouflage the blood. It's also fierce. And with that, they gained the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies in 1860 and 1861. And then, after that, thanks to the help of Bismarck beating up Austria and France, they then gained control of Rome, which was supported by the Austrians and the French forces. So they now have complete control over all of the Italian peninsula by 1870. But with Garibaldi, he is a major player. He was a career revolutionist. He not only led revolutions in Italy in the 1840s, he also leads revolutions in South America. He lives in New York for a couple of years before moving back to Italy after hearing that unification is going to happen. And he also becomes an American citizen. Forgot to put that one in there. Now, the deal with Cavour in taking over the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies was that he was going to gain supplies from Cavour. Cavour was going to ship them down to the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, and he was going to help defeat them and liberate those areas. Cavour didn't really think that it was going to work. He thought that Garibaldi was going to take his forces down there. They're going to mill around for maybe a year or two, but they weren't going to be completely successful. Cavour thought that he was going to be able to weaken, or Garibaldi was going to weaken the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, and Cavour would then be able to go down there with his own forces and clean it up. But Garibaldi's forces actually go down, rip through very quickly, and then start marching north. And as they're marching north, they're liberating the provinces that have not already been taken, and they even take Rome. They go into the capital, and which is not looked well upon by the Pope, who is control of the Papal States, which is pretty much the entire middle point of Italy, and he's now marching towards Sardinia, Piedmont. And this scares Cavour. Cavour thinks that Garibaldi has gone rogue and is now going to take them over and claim Italy for himself. So Cavour actually sends forces to stop Garibaldi, and what happens is his forces end up joining up with Garibaldi. So now Cavour is stuck. He has no forces whatsoever, and here comes the marching north. But Garibaldi does something completely catches Cavour by surprise. He hands a unified Italy over to Victor Emmanuel, and because he is a revolutionist, he wants to see Italy unified. He's an extreme nationalist. He knows that Victor Emmanuel is the man to lead him, so he hands it all over wrapped up in a nice present on Christmas Day. So what now happens, as you see, they now, within 12 years, you now have a unified Italy. And as I was saying, with the Papal States, you can see in the purple, that's all the land that was claimed by the Pope. And by 1870, it's divvied all the way down to that. And then later on, it's just Vatican City. Now, because of the unification process and because of the way that there were problems. So some of the problems is there's still division between the people, and now it's north and south. The north is more metropolitan, the south is more rural. So there's tensions there. The church is not a huge fan because they just lost a whole bunch of land. So there's resistance, and it's kind of difficult to rule in a country that is about 99.9% Catholic, and you have the Pope right there. And then you have groups within Italy that do not want to see a government, a king. So you have anarchists who are looking to eliminate the government in Italy. So there are resistance right away. There are problems. There's also a problem with industrialization. Unlike Germany, who can industrialize and move forward and build this massive economy, Italy doesn't have that. They don't have the natural resources. You also have overpopulation. So Cavour, now that he has a unified Italy, really has to work to try and keep these guys together, because it's just problem after problem after problem after problem. But the people are proud of their Italian heritage, and especially, they're now unified, so they are sticking together. But Victor Emmanuel is really trying to work, and Cavour is really trying to work to maintain power. So, finish it all off. What I want you to do is compare the unification process using this lecture and also using the internet and the textbook. And one thing I want you to specifically focus on is, after looking at comparing the two, what was the overall significance on world history? Okay, and this is something that we will build on as we move forward. But from what how is this so significant in world history at that time, and then moving forward? So we'll talk about this later.